sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love that I seem to lose with all my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. You could say that. All right. Some things are best said with poetry, with creativity and turn of phrase, with order and balance. Some deep truths need to be communicated this way. The deep truths of our lives beg to be expressed beyond mere information, beyond facts. And I'm not saying it doesn't need to be factual, right? But really what I said in that poem was far more truth. It was just said with passion, with more meaning, more deeply. Last week we began looking at this letter that Paul has written to the church in Colossae, and he opened with a greeting, just saying, man, I love the faith, the new life that I see springing up among you. But more than anything, Paul wants to impart to this little, new, young church a deep truth. A deep truth that says, if you want to grow, if you want to increase in wisdom and in power and patience and thanksgiving, if you want to know who God really is, if you want to know what God has done, if you want to know who you are, if you want to know what purpose you exist in the world for, then you must know the centrality and supremacy of Jesus the Christ. And if you know Jesus the Christ, all of those things will fall into place. That's the deep truth that Paul is trying to communicate to this little church. So instead of busting out the chalkboard, oh, they're having a good time over there. Instead of pray for those children's workers right now. Instead of busting out the chalkboard, though, Paul, he does something different, right? There's no flow charts here. There's no diagrams, no Excel spreadsheets in terms of trying to talk about who God is. He busts out into a poem. He busts out into a song, and maybe we wouldn't see it, but this really is a poem. These verses we're looking at today in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 23, it's a hymn, it's a song, it's a poem, and you see it in the balance and in the turn of phrase in the original Greek. You see it there, that something beautiful, there's something beautiful that Paul's trying to communicate. So I want us just to soak in this morning. And I want to read it over you. I want to read it over you in a little bit different translation so that if you're really familiar, sometimes we have to come to familiar things in new ways with new eyes to let God speak to us, okay? So we'll start here in Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. He is the image of God, the invisible one, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, in the heavens and here on earth. Things we can see and things we cannot. Thrones and lordships and rulers and powers, all were created both through him and for him. And he is ahead of all things, prior to all else, and in him all things hold together. And he himself is supreme, the head over the body, the church. He is the start of it all, firstborn from the realms of the dead, so in all things he might be the chief. For in him all the fullness was glad to dwell, and through him to reconcile all to himself, making peace through the blood of his cross. Through him, yes, things on earth, and also the things in heaven. But today I just want to soak in this poem and the words directly following it. I want to draw 3 observations and then 3 implications. Anybody ever seen Dead Poet Society? It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Robin Williams plays this literature teacher teaching these young boys. Do you remember on that first day, he sits them down into the class and they're all very straight-laced. And he says, please open your textbooks. And it's, Understanding Poetry by J. Evans Pritchard, right? And he tells the first kid to start reading. And he's reading this very wooden description of how to take apart and dissect poetry, right? And then Robin Williams is like, great, thank you for reading that. I want you to rip that out, and I want you to throw it in the air. And they're all throwing it in the trash, right? And they're all going crazy. And which is a beautiful truth to be communicated, that oftentimes when we come to a poem, maybe the best thing to do is not to try and dissect it. It is to experience it, to feel it. And so I want to kind of do both this morning. I want to cheat a little bit. I want us to kind of come at it through our minds, and I want to come at it through our bodies, come at it through our experience this morning. So we'll get right to it. 3 observations, 3 implications. First, we discover who God is by looking at Jesus. Paul starts his poem by saying he's the image of the invisible God. It only takes a quick flyover of the Scriptures to see that God is an invisible character in the Scriptures. The Old Testament says that no man has ever seen God. In Exodus, God says no human can look at God and live. God is spirit. And throughout the Old Testament, if there is some kind of physical manifestation of God, it's smoke or wind or fire or a whisper in the storm. But he's never seen. He's the invisible God. But Paul says here, he, meaning Jesus, is the image of the invisible God. Some have tried to argue here that Paul's just saying, well, Jesus is the image, basically means like he's the rough sketch of God. He's not really all of God. He's just kind of the general essence of God, a hint of a sense of what God might be like. But Paul doesn't leave room for that, right? It's just a few lines later down in the poem, Paul doesn't say, in him the rough sketch of God was pleased to dwell. No, he says, in him the fullness of God. All of God's being was full. The fullness of God's being was pleased to dwell. Jesus even said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. You want to know what God is like? Look at Jesus. He's not a faint representation of God, but the blazing glory of God condescended all the way into human flesh. Or as the poem said this morning, the ocean, it's like the ocean being poured into a backyard swimming pool. Galaxies contained in a glass of water. The fullness of God inhabiting human flesh. Now, this is an amazing mystery. The incarnation, God in human flesh and blood, is a mystery. How can you do that? How can you squash that down? How could God condescend so far? How could the fullness of God inhabit a human? And we could spend our lives trying to understand the mystery and never get there. But the truth is such an encouragement. Paul is saying Jesus is the image of the invisible God. It's as if God has been on the other side of a wall all of our lives. And maybe we've heard God or sensed God and never been able to see God. And it's as if at the end of the hallway someone's placed a mirror for us to be able to look down the hallway, and now we can see that God that was always invisible to us is now clearly seen in Jesus. And what do we see? We see a God that's humble, a God who washes feet and welcomes children. We see a God who puts the self-righteous and corrupt in their place and shows compassion on the outcast and the unlovely. We see that God resists the methods of the world, violence, coercion, power on the backs of the helpless, and manipulation. Instead, God embraces sacrifice, patience, presence, poverty, mercy, compassion. God is patient and kind, slow to anger, and full of steadfast love. God is full of grace and truth. God is self-giving love. If Jesus is the image of the invisible God, God is full of self-giving love. If only God had walked the earth, we say, then we would know what he was like. He did, and we know. We know because this Jesus was all of these things. We know what God is like because we have seen him, the image of the invisible. And so this may seem like a very, obvious one, a very obvious observation to make based off of Paul's poem. We discover who God is by looking at Jesus. Second, Jesus holds together the old and the new. What do I mean by this? Well, Paul says he's the firstborn of all creation. In him all things were created, above and below, visible and invisible, seen and unseen. He created everything. He, Jesus, created everything. It means our idea of Jesus has to expand. Oftentimes we think of Jesus, we don't think of Jesus the Christ, the cosmic Christ. We think of a Jesus who, yes, entered space and time in history, right? In first century Palestine during the reign of Herod. He did enter history, but the Christ was before all things. And in him, everything was created and everything holds together. To say he's the firstborn, it's almost a little bit confusing to say he's the firstborn of all creation, because we would generally think, doesn't that title belong to Adam? You have to understand the word firstborn isn't about chronological. You have to think in terms of kingship and reign. Because who is it that has the right to reign and rule in the family? It's the firstborn. This is a title that's given to Jesus. He's the one who has the right to rule over all things because he created all things, and in him all things hold together. Right? This image is mind-boggling. It's really hard to take in unless you stop and try and meditate on this reality. That the Christ holds the balance of the universe in his hands. The balance of the atomic structure, the timing of the seasons, the cycle of water, the balance of predators and prey, the amount of krill that are in the ocean that can feed the gigantic whales, the tides, the perfect distance of the earth to the sun, the axis and the rotation of the earth, the orbit of the planets in the solar system, the expansion of the universe. He holds it all together. But Paul says that's not all. He's the one who created all things, and in him all things are being recreated. Why is this necessary? It's necessary because we know that creation suffers from the ugliness of sin and death. Because of the rebellion of humanity from God, there is suffering, there's famine, there's disease. We know that humanity has twisted God's good creation at every turn. We mar God's image in creation. Instead of caring for the earth, we use it and abuse it. And even worse, we mar God's image in each other. Humanity does violence against itself in unimaginable ways. And so God scraps it all. No. He doesn't scrap it all. Paul says Jesus isn't just the firstborn of creation, he's the firstborn of the new creation. Through his resurrection from the dead, he is recreating the world. Or as Eugene Peterson puts it, he says it this way in the Message: he was supreme in the beginning, and leading the resurrection parade, he's supreme in the end. From beginning to end, he's there, towering far above everything and everyone. I love that imagery. He led the creation parade in the beginning, and he's leading the resurrection parade in the end. Jesus holds together the old world and the new. Which means that there's no sphere of existence over which Jesus Christ is not sovereign. Or as C.S. Lewis puts it, there's no neutral ground in the universe. Every square inch, every split second is claimed by God and counterclaimed by Satan. Jesus holds both the old and the new. Third, excuse the typo, the only way to locate ourselves in the world, not word, is to locate ourselves in him. The only way to locate ourselves in the world is to locate ourselves in him. After Paul's poem, he goes on to say this in verse 21. He says, and you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. Sometimes I like seeing it here again in a different translation. This is the Message He says, you yourself are a case study of what he does. At one time, you all had your backs turned to God, thinking rebellious thoughts of him, giving him trouble every chance you got. But now, by giving himself completely at the cross, actually dying for you, Christ brought you over to God's side and put your lives together, whole and holy in his presence. If the poem is Paul trying to give us a sense of the cosmic Christ, the Christ that holds the universe, it's as if he's giving us a map of the universe and saying Jesus is at the center of this entire thing. Everything is sourced and found in him, and it's this massive, wide picture. Have you ever gone out and looked at the stars with somebody who knows what they're talking about? Because I don't know what I'm talking about, stars, but I've had on a couple of occasions, you get out like into Central Oregon, you get out somewhere where the light pollution is gone on a clear night, and you're staring up into the stars, and somebody was able to say, this is this star, and this is how far away it is. And that star, you think you're looking at a star, but you're not even actually looking at a star. You're looking at a galaxy. That's a cluster of over 1 billion stars. And this is how many light years away that star is and how long that light took to come and reach your eye. And all of a sudden you feel this shrinking feeling as if you are extremely small. It's as if on the map of the universe, you're begging to find that little red dot that says you are here. And you feel like, I don't even know if I can find it. I feel so small and insignificant. Paul turns from his poem to tell the Colossians and us, you are here. This is where you are. This is how you locate yourself in the cosmos. At one point, you were in rebellion on the outside. You had your back turned to God, the creator and sustainer and redeemer of all things. But now, did you catch that? Paul starts out, he says, once you were this way, but now something magnificent has occurred. Once you were lost, outside the purposes of God. And now through his death on a cross, he has brought you in. He has located you. He has taken all the broken and dislocated parts of you and the universe, and he's pulling them in. And he's pulling you in, and he's pulling them together so that you're no longer on the outside, alienated and hostile, but now you are whole and holy in God's presence, blameless and above reproach. The story of humanity is the story of trying to do God's work without God, of trying to be God without God. It's the sin of Adam and Eve, and it's our sin as well. We've been given the ability to steward and be many rulers of creation, but at every turn, we've decided that we can do it without him, or we can do it better than him. And so we seek to identify ourselves, to make a name for ourselves, to define ourselves apart from him, and in so doing, we turn our backs on the creator and sustainer and redeemer of all things. Paul is saying, but it's through this Jesus, the firstborn among the dead, that God rescues us. He reconciles us to God. Through nailing our rebellion to the cross, God redeems and reconciles us in the world. And he says, this is who you are, beloved and loved, holy and whole, blameless, above reproach in the sight of God. And it's not only that, but it's in Jesus that we're given this blueprint for what genuine humanity looks like. This is what humanity is supposed to look like. Imitate this. And so without Jesus, we're lost. We're unredeemed. We're at odds with God. But with Jesus, we are found, redeemed, and at peace with God. Those are my 3 observations. You can throw this up one more time. We discover who God is by looking at Jesus. Jesus holds together the old and the new. And the only way to locate ourselves in the world is to locate ourselves in him. Now, really quick, some implications. Implication number 1. Jesus is the way to know God. We don't need to look for God elsewhere. Let's start with the hardest one, I feel like, in some ways. This is a really difficult one for us when we live in a society where we're led and encouraged to be as inclusive and as tolerant as possible. And so to say, Jesus is the way to God, and we don't need to look elsewhere, grates against us. It grates against those of us who believe. We even have a hard time saying, how do I live into this reality? But Paul's poem and the truth that he's communicating doesn't leave much space for it here. I don't want to wash over this and just say, tough luck, deal with it. It's a difficult implication of what Paul is saying, because in our cultural context, to declare the supremacy of Christ is to set yourself up as a target. At the least, you're going to be called arrogant. Worse, you're going to be called intolerant. The very worst, you're going to be a bigot or closed-minded, the ultimate pariah of our culture. But there isn't room here. Jesus is not just a good teacher. That's not what Paul's saying here. He's not just saying he's a valuable prophet or a compassionate social justice warrior. He is the image of the invisible God. He is God in human flesh. He is the beginning and the end, which is a massive claim that one should not take lightly. Now, the place where we've probably messed this up is that we haven't lived this out well. We've lived this out arrogantly. We've lived it in a way to close ourselves off from all other truth and reality that exists in the world. But the mission of the church has never been to say that truth cannot be found elsewhere. That's not the mission of the church, to say truth can't be found outside our four walls. We own all truth, all time and forever. Christianity says Jesus is the head. Jesus is supreme. Jesus is the source of all life and light and truth in the world, and it emanates from here. And that does imply something. It implies that other religions and philosophies, as they stand on their own, cannot be the doorway into the new creation. But believe me, there are beautiful things to be learned. And we should seek to learn them in God's word that he's given to us, and in Jesus Christ, his Son, the blazing glory of God right in front of us. But it doesn't mean we have to be arrogant towards all other things. It might surprise you to know that your pastor sometimes reads Buddhist monks. But my belief in Christ doesn't limit me from seeking truth in their words. The supremacy of Christ is a truth to hold tightly, but wield gently. It's a truth to stand firm on, but carry with humility. Jesus is a rock to build our lives on, our very foundation, not a rock to beat other people down with. Second implication. Skipping ahead. Everything must go. And by this, I mean idols. If what Paul says is true, everything else has to go. Nothing else can stand against the creator, sustainer, and redeemer of the cosmos. Jesus is the Christ, the central source of all things, the divine heart of everything. And so to bow before anything else, to place anything else in the place of God, or to place our trust in any other thing, is idolatry. And we could spend hours this morning, we could spend weeks dissecting and talking about all of our idols, our particular idols of sex or money or power. At least it's the big three, but there's a whole bunch of other little gods that we love as well. The one that I want to highlight this morning is an idol called control. And the reason I want to highlight it is because if we say in him all things hold together, then it means I don't hold all things together. How often do we see ourselves as the ones playing God? We take our lives into our own hands, And we think just with the right amount of self-knowledge and self-help and self-esteem and self-starting, we can control our destinies. We can control our future, the future of others, the future of our kids. And while we may never say it with our words that this is our worldview, we live it out in our lives, bowing down to this idol of control. And our comfortable consumeristic culture feeds it. Because if we have a problem, we can find a way to solve it. If you have an answer, you can find it. If you have a question, you can find the answer. That's what I meant to say. You know what I meant. If this doctor can't fix it, there's certainly another one who can. And we move in this endless cycle of control. And it works, and it works, and it works until it doesn't. Until everything comes crashing down around us. And we're confronted with our idol of control. And it's usually then that we begin to question the goodness of God. But there is another path. It's the path of letting go. Of letting go now before it has to be ripped from our hands. The truth is we don't hold it all together. We never did. But we like to live like we do. And when we do, we live as if we are God. Jesus models this letting go for us in his prayer in the garden. Not my will, but yours. It's this, we usually think of indifference as a really bad thing. But Jesus exhibits this indifference. Not my will, yours. I'm indifferent to it. A surrender to the will of God, who is sovereign and holds all things together. Last implication. Don't give up, hold fast. Paul, right on the heels of this poem, he says this. This assumes, of course, that you keep firmly on in the faith, by which I mean solid on your foundations and not shifting from the hope of the gospel which you heard. Or the way Peterson puts it, you don't walk away from a gift like that. You stay grounded and steady in the bond of trust, constantly tuned in to the message, careful not to be distracted or diverted. It's as if Paul is saying, here's the foundation. Now lay some bricks on it. Don't walk away from the beauty of the gospel that Jesus himself has redeemed you through his cross. You can be given a foundation. You can pour a foundation. You can pour a foundation and then kind of step out of your door every day and look at the foundation that you've poured and stare at it and never build upon it. And what happens over time is maybe this sense of like, is it a good enough foundation? Is it going to hold what I want to build here? Paul's invitation by saying keep firmly on is just saying lay up bricks. You'll see that the foundation is solid. It's unshakable. Don't give up. Don't let go. Don't walk away from the good news you've been entrusted with. And this is my encouragement to us as well. There's a lot of reasons to walk away. The church can be a really ugly place sometimes. Jesus' followers can be really difficult people to be around. And oftentimes we can not do it well. But Jesus Christ is a sure foundation. Don't give up. Don't let go. I was writing those words last night. Jesus Christ is a sure foundation, and these words of this hymn came flooding back to my mind. I have all of these songs that are like stored away in old filing cabinets in my brain that I haven't sung in years, but growing up in a little Baptist church in Central Oregon, they're like back there. And I typed in the title of the song because I couldn't remember all the words. And I think it's a fitting way to close out my thoughts this morning. How firm a foundation, you saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in his excellent word. What more can he say than to you he has said, to you who for refuge to Jesus have fled? Fear not, I am with you. Oh, be not dismayed, for I am your God, and will still give you aid. I'll strengthen you, help you, and cause you to stand, upheld by my righteous and almighty hand. When through the deep waters I call you to go, the rivers of sorrow shall not overflow. For I will be with you, your troubles to bless, and sanctify to you your deepest distress. The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not desert to his foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no never, no never forsake. Hold fast. The God of heaven and earth has died to redeem you. He will not forsake you. Build your life on him. I want to invite Chris to come on up and the worship team. I said earlier that we're going to talk about this a little bit, and that sometimes we need to experience it. We need to rest in the goodness of God. So I just want to create some space this morning for you to rest in this song, to rest in the reality of the song through just a guided prayer. If you guys want to go ahead and take the lights down a little bit, I want to encourage you to maybe empty your hands for a minute. To sit up straight but not rigid, not slouched, somewhere in between. And if you're comfortable, close your eyes and take some deep breaths. Maybe another. As we bring our attention to our breath, we return to this ever-present reality. We're always breathing in and breathing out. We do it without thinking. So just take a minute and become aware of it. Let it be a way that you're drawn to the reality of the presence of Christ. He's the one who created the air with oxygen that fills your lungs, enters your bloodstream, and fuels the life of your body. And as you become aware of your breath, become aware of God's loving presence to you, the one who created you and who sustains you with each breath. God of the cosmos, we honor you. You who choreographed the solar flares, the orbits of the planets, and the wild careening of comets and meteors. You who can name every ancient rock in the asteroid belt. You who paint sunrises and sunsets, the plumage of birds, and the camouflage of insects. You who with your finest brushes watercolored the wings of butterflies and the costumes of flowers. We honor you. Christ the sculptor, we honor you. You who chisel out rocks and mountain ranges and cup your hands to form sand dunes. We honor you. Christ the musician, we honor you. You who makes flutes of the willows by the lakeside and of the reeds on the riverbank, and whose bass baritone reverberates in the thunder, and whose soprano trills in the morning music of the songbird. You who drum ecstatically with your raindrops on the sun-parched plains. And you who hold all of these sounds in the silence of a star-studded night sky, we honor you. Christ the architect, we honor you. You who silently whisper the secrets of home building in the hearts of weaver birds and ants, in the hearts of spiders and mice, in the sacred geometry of the temple makers, and in the wombs of mammal mothers. We honor you. Christ the awakener, we honor you. You who patiently call forth more and more complete images of yourself until we fully remember you. Christ the renovator, we honor you. In blood spilled and body broken, you took all the broken and dislocated pieces of the universe, people and things, animals and atoms, and you're pulling us back together so that we might sing your song again, your song of vibrant harmonies, of a new creation, where there is no need for temple or sun, where you are the glory that lights the world, and your presence is among us. Jesus the Christ, we rest now in you. Maybe just become aware for a second of how your hands are postured. Have you had your fists clenched tight? How are they resting? And maybe if you feel comfortable, to take your hands and to rest them on your legs, on your knees, with your palms facing upward. To open your hands to God. Holy, holy, holy God, we place ourselves in your presence. We rest in the promise of your grace. Our minds and our spirits are cluttered with so many thoughts and feelings that threaten to pull our attention away from you. Let us unclench our fists and release these things. We release control of all that we've done this week, whether for good or for ill. We release control of all that we feel like we should have done this week but did not. We release control of all that we need to do tomorrow. We release our fear. We release our anxiety. We release our impatience. We release our pride. All of the thoughts, all of the feelings that pull us away from you, oh God, we release. We trust you, the one who holds all things together. Lord, we yield ourselves to you. May your will be our delight. May your love be the pattern of our living. We surrender to you our hopes, our dreams, our ambitions. Do with them what you will, when you will, as you will. We place into your loving care the things that are closest to our hearts, our family, our friends, our future. Care for them with the care that we could never give. We release into your hands our need to control, our craving for status, our fear of obscurity. Eradicate the evil, purify the good, and establish your kingdom in our hearts and on this earth. I invite you to open your eyes and to stand with me. Now gathered at your table, O God of all creation, and remembering Christ crucified, risen, who was and is to come, we offer to you our gifts of bread and wine and ourselves as living, breathing sacrifices. Pour out your Spirit on these gifts. Breathe your Spirit over the whole earth and make us your new creation, the body of Christ, given for the world you have made. And in the fullness of time, God, bring us with all your saints from every tribe and language and people and nation to feast at the banquet prepared from the foundations of the world. Through Christ, and with Christ, and in Christ, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, to you be honor, glory, and praise forever and ever. Amen.
This is my Father's world. To my listening ears, all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. Arrest me in that thought of rocks and trees, skies and seas, this and the the earth beat. You set us up above all the stars. You set us on a high place by where you are. And while we were dead, you made us your friends. And scattered our dead upon the wave. Glory to one, God's murdered Son, paid for my resurrection. Once from the dust, once from the grave, daughters and sons from the ashes you raise. Hidden our faults, even from your own face. Scattered our dead upon the waves. Glory to one, God's murdered Son, who paid for my resurrection. Once from the dust, once from the grave, daughters and sons from the ashes you raised. You've hidden our faults, even from your own face, and scattered our dead upon the waves. Scattered our dead upon the waves. And all glory be to Christ our King. All glory be to Christ. His rule and reign will never cease. All glory be to Christ. All glory be to Christ our King. All glory be to Christ. His rule and reign will never cease. All glory be to Christ. Praise Jesus Christ, whose love sustains, who bore the cross of sin and shame, who holds us now with everything, as reigning Lord and sovereign King. And so, Union Chapel, may you know and experience Christ above you, Christ beneath you, Christ upon your right and Christ upon your left, Christ before you and Christ behind you, Christ upon your eyes and Christ upon your lips, Christ upon your hearts and Christ upon your feet, so that you may go forth from this place to love and serve a risen Lord and participate with him in the restoration and healing of the whole world. Union Chapel, go in peace. So we've got a newcomers forum on the top floor right after this. If you've got time to join us, we'd love to have you. No, it was good. Totally.